Welcome to Best Practices for Community Executives at Primer. I'm Joe Pishgar, Chief Community Officer of Vertical Scope. I've been a professional community manager for more than 18 plus years and currently oversee around 1,200 individual site brands with communities. Online community management defined is the management of a common discussion resource through actions of volunteers and stakeholders, advocating for the users and brand of an online forum, organizing communications, and empowering members of the community to engage. This is my definition, but your mileage may vary. As for community manager, what they are, well, it's kind of a mix between a nanny and a lightning rod. We're gardeners in the orchards of user-generated content, and we're just as likely to fight Nazis and Klansmen before a morning coffee. We keep communities safe, civil, and secure while architecting a sense of belonging. We are conduits of the Vox Populi, network atlas of online personas, the first line of defense for digital society, and purveyors of online assemblage. We are avatars of hospitality and welcome, concierges of connections, fathers of forums, and mothers of moderation. Community manager is just much easier to say. The term sometimes gets confused with the occupation hired by a homeowners association to walk around the neighborhood making sure your fence is a certain height and your trash bins are pulled in from the street. This ain't that. No worries, however, this isn't a full ego trip with my particular brand of the Kool-Aid. For that, we'd need at least an hour. Instead, let's get to what you want to know, how to become Chief Community Officer and be successful at it. This is what most of you are here for. You won't find this in any clickbaity article or consulting firm keyword SEO optimized blog post because the people who know would rather others not in order to keep the competition in a fairly narrow space minimal. These are lessons hard learned through trial and error. Chalk it up to conceit or arrogance that I'm spilling the tea on it and letting the cat out of the bag. In my hubris, I welcome professional competition because it means new colleagues, new potential schools of thought in community management. First off, be sure this is what you want. Season 1, Episode 4 of Mythic Quest, we're introduced to Sue, the community manager. If you haven't seen the clip and felt what she says in your bones, you might not be ready for it. Note, one thing that you do miss when you become leadership is that you don't get your hands on the soil of CM as much anymore, so be sure this is what you want to do because it comes with unique stressors. If this is what you want, well, then you need to have the prerequisite skills and experience or start building them now. The role is still incredibly new, as is our profession, but I would say a bare minimum of 10 years of professional experience at a medium or larger size company in increasing order of community management responsibilities and a solid track record of success. Skills at diplomacy, communications, and persuasiveness should be the emphasis. You'll need to know how to run a profit and loss statement, justify your department's existence as director or VP to executives, and get buy-in for new projects. Aggressively network and grow in the field of community management to establish your own school of thought to some extent. To liken it to cooking, you should have a solid book of proven recipes. Around a quarter of them should be yours. Next, apply for Director, VP, or Senior VP of community roles where they exist. There is no such thing as a vacancy announcement for Chief Community Officer at this point. Get a discussion with either the president or CEO of the company. Get an offer and then elevate the desired title to Chief Community Officer. The onus is on you to make the case for representation of community's interests at the executive level, how you will do what you will do, and why having a CCO is critical. Recruiters, HR, and others are not looking to bring on new executives, but presidents and CEOs might be persuaded by the wisdom in having community represented within the leadership. I once made the error of mentioning to a people and culture executive that I'd like to be considered for Chief Community Officer. Executives are not, as a rule, looking for peers to join them and compete for resources. Go to the president or CEO. Alternatively, if your networked way-in is with investors or board members, that's another valid avenue of ascension via recommendation. Another potential might be if there's a vacancy listed for Chief Marketing Officer or Chief Communications Officer, and your marketing or comms cross-discipline background is strong enough to receive attention, then adjust the offer accordingly given the presence of community management as a need. That's the trick. That's the need to know. You have to build it out of whole cloth. Two decades ago, I was working in the Walmart Photo Lab, and I conveyed my experience running events as a contractor for Electronic Arts Ultima Online into a job with Big Huge Games as their community manager intern. One day I started dropping the intern tag from the title and mentioned to my boss in doing so that yielded better results in getting responses back. He was cool with it, and that's how I became a community manager. I don't recommend that particular egregious approach, but it taught me to cleave upwards and become the thing that I want it to be. You have to carve the thing you want into existence, at least right now. Eventually, our discipline will be able to normalize the role and it will proliferate so that it becomes other people's idea to have this role at their company. Until then, it's on you. Here's an example of Chief Community Manager job description. This one is mine. It took a while to write. I'm still not completely happy with it. While simple and certainly able to brook some refinement, my intention was to ensure that it wasn't either too broad or brutally specific, since the role is incredibly nascent. I also didn't want to stymie definitions of the position with responsibilities and scope, since the role is so rare and examples are relatively few. There are perhaps a dozen of us on the planet right now. I would love to see 100 more emerge in the next few years. You will notice some heavy crossover with what has traditionally been the role of Chief Marketing Officer and Chief Communications Officer here, with operational responsibilities in for good measure. Also some Chief Trust and Safety Officer in there too. Notably absent from the list of duties above are tactical responsibilities. If you are doing tactical things as Chief Community Officer, you're probably closer to head of community and role. You need to delegate to staff unless you're doing those tactical things for training purposes, as an example. The Chief Community Officer has a lot of fingers in a lot of pies. This is because of the amplification effect of community's involvement. Community is like certain types of fungus or the human emotional glove, in that the more of it you share, the more of it you have. When I can work with the Chief Commerce Officer or Chief Product Officer or any other department to accomplish a goal, I get more community because of the symbiosis effect, and that's really our superpower. The Penny Arcade webcomic once referred to community management as the practice of eating bees. We're wranglers of broken toys. The villain described aptly by Bo Burnham's Welcome to the Internet is the Chief Community Officer's primary foe. Chief Community Officers are more than just community managers of community managers. They serve as community managers of executive teams, establishing connective tissue between departments, digesting consensus, raising issues pertinent to each. Community managers are familiar with the paradigm of operating in service to two masters, the company and the audience that they serve. CCOs have four masters: the company, the audience, the community managers, and the executive leadership. Company and audience you learn from the applied discipline, of course. Acting as conduit for a cavalcade of community managers, harnessing their energies, keeping them motivated, and understanding the why of what we do, that you tend to pick up as director. What takes longer is learning how to serve in symbiosis with and to the benefit of executive leadership. Let's talk about retinue for a moment. I'm an avid gamer, and a series of games I find myself pulling from a lot are Paradox's grand strategies like Crusader Kings. In one of them, there's this principle of retinue where an advisor adds their skills, wisdom, and abilities to that of the player character as leader, and this opens up more choices, leading to more beneficial outcomes and options. Retinue is not to be confused with having an entourage, which is a gaggle of hangers-on, typically engaged in a parasitic relationship, the classic yes men, butt-kissing sycophants, where the entourage waits to see what the leader will do and then vehemently agree. A retinue leans in close, offers timely counsel when a decision is needed, often before the decision is needed, as retinue tends to operate proactively. Just as your senior CMs are retinue to you, as department lead, you are retinue to the CEO or president of the company, and others in your executive leadership team. Your strength is their strength additive. Being a community manager at the table of executive leadership is an interesting position, since so much of what we do as community management professionals can be applied to ensuring the smooth operation of the team as well. There are different types of very strong personalities to interact with. It's often a matter of simply laying your cards out or active listening. Recognize their motivations, their aims, help them to achieve them. Community is fortunate in that most, if not all, of the leads in an organization can be empowered by the work that we do. One of the things I used to do when first meeting with executives was to inquire, what can community do for you? What new communities would you like to see? You get to yes, at least a no, or a no, but we might do this instead. I think in my history of working with leadership in companies, I think I've only ever given a flat no twice, and that was during a public relations crisis. Work to remove hurdles and problems for others, and the value of community will show through with you as its primary evangelist. Part of your journey to becoming and operating as community executive, whether it's as chief community officer, VP, or head of community, will be justifying the existence of community management to leadership and, by extension, investors. The value is often misunderstood or not easily conveyed. Fortunately, community management produces substantial return on investment revenue where community as product can be extrapolated into average revenue per user, or the funny sounding ARPU. Unfortunately, methodology for arriving at these conclusions still very much a work in progress. The Community Roundtable has a well-defined method, but it establishes requiring a value for answered questions, which you may or may not be able to set. For communities that are not the product themselves, that is, where programmatic or direct revenue is created from digital advertising or monetization of the user base, CMs have to extrapolate. The classic method of determining the value of a brand, which is another esoteric concept, difficult to quantify, is known as the willingness to pay, and it's a marketing thing. You can get there with net promoter score surveys and some fancy footwork and direct comparisons to competitors or market peers, but this is where you're going to spend a lot of time and energy. How often have you seen a company go completely off the rails because they didn't have solid damage control efforts in place, or zero sentiment analysis on a new feature or product that got rolled out, missed the mark entirely, or some newsworthy examples of awful crisis management? One of the most critical things that community management professionals can do is to serve as a backstop on stupid things from happening that can tank a business. If this core function of sifting signal from noise and providing directed feedback alone can keep the guardrails up from a business wandering into epic fail territory, it's worth it. Let's talk things community directors and senior CMs should know on their path to the executive vocation. Communities tend to serve multiple purposes, and asking what you intend to do with your community is CM 101. One of the things I most enjoy about inducting folks in the principle of community as product is walking them through a spreadsheet that shows the revenue for an individual community that's making over the course of its life. For a lot of our colleagues in the gaming or service industry, seeing a dollar amount tagged to the threads can be eye-opening. Most won't be able to establish direct ROI for their communities where they produce supplemental service instead of outright revenue, though I can say with fair confidence, community management return on investment hovers between 700 to 1,500%, as established by research by CMX and the CR. My favorite analogy for communities is that of the orchard. Fruit trees that are planted that may take years to mature, but once they do, they bear fruit in volume with minimal maintenance. Contrast this with editorial as a cash crop that is sown in the spring, harvested in the fall, with a sizable investment commensurate to short-term gains. It's easier to understand and give a sense of what value is brought by community and on what timeline for stakeholders and executives who may be uninitiated. Community operates on a long-haul timeline, predicating much of its generative power on building lifetime value for individual members. Find yours to establish the immense business value of community. I mentioned developing your own set of unique recipes for how you approach community management. This is one of my older recipes in my community cookbook. I tend to divvy things up into threes for ease of understanding and presentation. Community focus is where we roughly determine how our efforts and energy are going to be spent in growth, maintenance, and infrastructure. Quite simply, growth is building out new communities and the production and curation of user-generated content. Maintenance is safeguarding the communities we have, and infrastructure is improving the systems our audiences uses to engage with each other. If a tall glass of water represents community, the size of the glass represents infrastructure. Pouring water into the glass is growth, and the clarity of the water is maintenance. Formulating a visual system helps to convey to executive leadership that directors are accountable to where the work is being done and offers a nice, neat little set of buckets to categorize items. Most of the executives you interact with will want you to get to growth as much and as fast as possible. A third place is where lingering restores. I can go on for hours about the principle of third place. It's basically like a religion to me. But I will do best to make this brief. However, it is one of the most important things that we do in community management, if not the most. A third place is a spot between home and work where you hang out and discuss things with friends. Starbucks famously integrates third place philosophy as a differentiator in making their cafes comfortable, warm, and welcoming. You would meet someone for a quick business meeting at Starbucks, but would you do the same at a McDonald's? The difference is third place. The core member group at the center of any community is the foundation of that third place, and having that core is important to establishing a sense of place, the greater important sense of belonging coming with it. You are part of something bigger, I promise that you are, and there's so much community to go around. If you asked him, Norm would say he goes to Cheers for the drinks. He doesn't. Not really. He's there because it's his third place, a warm, safe, open environment that is accessible, accommodating, and populated by regulars who set the tone and build a culture. We build, curate, and steward the third places of the internet. So we've covered the need to know on how to become CCO and some of the advanced items at the directorial level. I'd like to dip to the community managerial, mostly on the end of survival and thriving, because many of you are running yourselves ragged. Why does community do what it does? At a personal level, I'm sure it's some psychological outcropping of an altruistic desire to positively impact the world around us, expressed through some sort of deeply seated masochistic need to serve as a kind of Atlas-like Sisyphean figure. Oh, you probably meant the why community management at the team level does what it's. That's easier to answer. I can give you the why built into the fabric of Vertical Scope Community Management Department. So we build value, succinctly put. The product that we sell is community, and we keep the reactor fuel going that keeps the product happening. We create value to members by keeping discussion steady and civil within our forums. We create value to commercial and advertising partners by playing dutiful host to the audiences they most seek to serve. And we create value to the company itself by amplifying the network effect of a member base of more than 65 million and their complementary communities they inhabit. We keep communities vibrant, safe, and civil. In the case of community as product, that makes revenue. In community as service, that's critical supplemental power to the brand, retention, and conversion. CM creates welcoming discussion venues of choice that empower decisions through dialogue. That is why we do what we do. What do we do? In a nutshell, all the things that keep our members happy, active, and engaged in productive conversation. And there's quite a laundry list of things that all add up to making that a reality. Organizationally at Vertical Scope, we're a department within the company that runs forum admin through oversight across about 1,200 plus sites in our network. At other companies, community may be 3 times that size or as small as a single CM. We're tasked with keeping up with the health and well-being of our forums and commentary systems across all of those sites. And we provide additional support through sentiment analysis, engagement initiatives, public relations, and other communications needs as necessary. Some rules of the road CM takes heart in the practice of our profession, useful reminders. Introduce yourself before the crisis. This one is attributed to Vertical Scope CEO Rob Laidlaw. There's nothing worse than showing up with water buckets at a blazing inferno and trying to explain that, honest to goodness, it isn't gasoline that you're holding. Best to have a relationship ahead of time. This can be quite a challenge, depending upon the number of communities you might have or their size, but it is important. If a member is upset, first understand why. Knowing the why always gives us an edge in helping to have that member find happiness and belonging. Use the buddy system for difficult threads. Take a second set of eyes. Helps to have someone to be able to tell when you need to tag out or perceive your text from a different tone when read. Approach complaints and bug reports with a bias for action. Follow the investigate, ask, fix, report steps. CM does not exist to throw chaff or make white noise over the gnashing of teeth from our members, simply dismissing concerns out of hand. Act as though we're your own community because ultimately it is. Praise in public, correct in private. Not only for members, but others on your team. This isn't just about being nice. It's literally more effective and strategic. Operate with respect for all members, even troublemakers. CMs are advocates for members. And some of the worst troublemakers I've encountered reformed to become the best moderators I've ever worked with. And attend a daily stand-up if you operate a CM team or as a part of other department videos preferred. Helps with inflections and nonverbal cues you might not otherwise pick up on. While community is dedicated to forging a bulwark of hope and togetherness, despair and darkness is pervasive in the online frontier and poses unique challenges to our profession. We are daily immersed in high voltage discourse, massive levels of toxicity, and intense mediation requirements. Some of you may have seen the exposés on the secret lives of contract and full-time moderation teams at Facebook and Twitter. These are not exaggerated. Every CM in the wild eventually undergoes what I refer to as the shattering, where the volume of judoing vitriol exceeds mental capacity and it becomes too much. For the gamers in the crowd, consider this the CM limit break. How that is handled determines whether or not the community manager's community or career survives intact. When it happens in a publicly visible way, which is what occurs when it goes very wrong, there's minimal or no support structure in place, the entire profession turns its eye to observe, and it's like watching a star die in the night sky. There's a lot of noise and fire, and it's sad, but there are dark lessons to be gleaned. One of the most infamous examples of this is CM Tisseric of Blizzard's World of Warcraft. Google his saga and pour one out for my homie. We take steps to reduce the frequency of that kind of thing and the probability that it will emerge by provisioning a support structure and recurring checks. Insistence upon self-care is at the core of these. Among the critical best practices for this, establish and attend your boundaries. Know how much to care and where to care, keep perspective, avoid channeling Atlas. Avoid workism, centering your sense of self and value around what it is you do rather than who you are. Do something physically creative. Take nothing said by members personally. Know what is self-imposed versus company-imposed. Watch for indicators of burnout in yourself and other CMs. Take steps to mitigate. Vent to friends and family out loud. Know when to walk away and delegate. And lastly, breathe. There's 3 great resources here. I strongly encourage reading at least the foremost one assembled by the CR. In our department, if you need a mental health day, you take one. Others may also insist that you do so if they notice signs of increased stress. On my team, no one earns extra credit or bonus points from me by destroying themselves. Community professionals are irksome to recruit and train, so I insist that no one wears themselves down to an empty husk. In the words of the incomparable Shania, that don't impress me much. Speaking of super annoying, being doxxed generates a negative limbic response that is absolutely disruptive to productivity. Functionally speaking, it trips fight or flight, and it's really hard to persuade growth when you're in panic mode. So it's important for your well-being to ensure that your online persona is kept containerized for your safety and security. This means establishing and keeping up with good internet hygiene for anyone who deals with the online public in a day-to-day capacity. Reduce your social footprint exposure by making extensive use of those privacy settings on Facebook, Twitter, etc. Google yourself and combinations of your name, see if you can find yourself. Remove anything that you can. There's usually a request for removal form associated with the listing. Use that. For more toxic communities, use only your first name in interacting with members or a pseudonym altogether. If you find yourself getting angry or taking it personal, tag in another person on your team if available and walk away. And escalate to legal any threats of doxing, harassment, or threats of physical violence. They need to have your back. CMSOS, you may reach a critical breaking point where you are unable to exercise any of these self-care items, a place where you have reached the end of your rope and need to be talked down from a ledge. Your stress may violently spike. You may feel as though you're responsible for the world, each individual member of your community weighing you down with immense expectations and feeling yourself failing hard, out of patience, out of sanity, and out of power. And you start to crack. The shattering. Build yourself contingencies for when, not if, on this. But here, a break glass in case of emergency. This is cliche. It needs to be said. You are not alone. You are part of an extended family of community managers like yourself who have been where you are, and we all owe an obligation to one another to help. You need to remember to do just one thing, and I recommend everybody write it down while you can, and that is reach out to your fellow community managers in the CMX group on Facebook, or swing over to the Community Club Discord. Find an admin or colleague and discreetly explain where you are in your head and that you need help. They will either help you directly or they will set you up with someone who can. If it's very bad, you can add me on LinkedIn, hit me up on Messenger there. I will help as I can. We are obliged to each other in this mutual aid. Thank you for your time and attention. I will take your questions now if there's time.
Awesome, Joe. Thank you so much. Let's have a quick look at questions. We've got a couple of minutes. Shannon asks, what is the top skill a community person in the middle should focus on to move to a director level or senior director exec? I know you covered this partly, but yeah, curious about the number one focus in your opinion for these different roles.
Justification for community management comes up most of the time, I think. Being able to draw a line between your presence, your existence at the leadership level you are, and then the leadership level you'd like to get to. If you can do it with dollars, then great. If you can do it with some extrapolated metric, that's good too. But being able to do that is a critical part of getting from middle management to upper management and beyond. That's the part that most people struggle with the most, because it's not functionally community management. It's not where we come from.
Yeah. And maybe following on a bit from that, Amidia asks, how is your relationship with other C-levels? What were your challenges in this relationship?
My relationship is fantastic with them. I have weekly one-on-ones with all the C-suite folks. I'm always on the lookout for things that I can do to make their lives easier. I don't maintain an adversarial approach. So some CM might view sales or dev or other departments as adversarial at times. You never want to get into that mindset because it starts to send things south. I look to see what I can do from the community end to make their lives better, to help them achieve their goals. Because like I said about the symbiosis effect, anything that I can do that's working with them, that means more community for me. That's our superpower. It's why we get all the, it's how community grows. We're doing stuff with others. It's the very nature of the friction between interactions. Yeah.
Very nice. Well, Joe, thank you so much. Loads of great things to take from that. And I know people were calling out tons of amazing quotes. So beautifully written, greatly presented. Really appreciate it. And yeah, big thank you from everyone that's here today. And thanks everyone for attending. Please go back to the lobby and find another great session to attend. Thanks again, Joe.
Thanks, everybody.
All the best.
Ciao for now. Bye.